Are you trying to improve your productivity in your business? You know you need to, but your boss just doesn't see it. Well, today we're going to cover productivity measures and value stream mapping and ways to improve your business using both. Hi, my name is Donovan. I have over 10 years of experience in supply chain. I've worked for large companies like Apple, and I've even opened my own e-commerce warehouse, shipping over 10,000 orders a month. My passion is bringing small business owners like you who are working from their home, garage, or small storage space the tips and tricks used by large warehouses to make your business the next big thing. Alright, so let's go and get started talking about productivity today. If we can go ahead and get signed up for the next lesson. We'll be covering lessons every week here at this space. Singapore 10 a.m. and in the West Coast US at 7 p.m. with Daylight Savings Time and 10 p.m. on the East Coast with Daylight Savings Time. And if you could go do me a favor, share this out to your friends. I'm doing that now, making sure it gets to all my groups. Alright, thanks for that, guys. So let's go ahead and get started. Today we're talking about productivity, and just a reminder, our good friend Robert E. Cole has over 20 years of experience in supply chain and improving quality in businesses. So what he says is effective imitation turns out not to be imitation at all, but a process of creative borrowing and adaptation. So friends, make sure that you go ahead and take into account these may not work exactly for your business. Take the tips and tricks that you can use for your business and apply them as you see fit. So our agenda for today, we're going to be covering productivity, outputs produced versus inputs used. So the whole goal of your business is to take inputs, either materials or orders, and provide a service or a change in process to provide an output. So you want to make sure that your outputs have a greater value than your inputs. So we're going to go over the ways to do that, and then later ways to improve. Our productivity measures, we're going to focus on the total productivity measures, and then get into multi-factor productivity measures, and finally partial productivity measures. Once we get into partial, we're going to dive into that value stream mapping. So improving productivity. When you get up here, we're going to talk. We have a few ways that we can improve productivity. Managing growth, working smarter, getting the ideal, greater efficiency, and managing decline. So let's take a look a little bit more in detail on what we're talking about here. Our productivity is our output divided by our inputs. So we want to make sure that our outputs are greater value. And we can do that by increasing our output and at the same time increasing our inputs. But it's going to be at a lesser rate than our outputs are increasing. So that's going to be managing growth. We're growing both our outputs and our inputs, but inputs are at a lower rate. Now, working smarter is using the same amount of inputs to create a greater value of outputs. So working better with what you have. Now, the ideal you want to try and reach is you're increasing your outputs while also being more efficient with your inputs. That's the ideal scenario you want to try and achieve. And then greater efficiency is making the same amount of output and being able to use less inputs. Now, finally, we don't want to be in this situation, but it happens, where your outputs need to decline. But you want to decrease your inputs at a greater rate than your outputs are declining. So manage that declining appropriately. So let's get into total productivity. It's going to be a top line look. We're going to be taking a look at 4 factors when you look at total productivity. All costs in your business are going to fall into one of these 4 categories: labor, material, energy, or capital. So labor, of course, is your workers, their salaries. Anybody who's working actually on the product or doing support functions like customer service or finance will also be included in your labor costs. Material is, of course, anything that's being used in the production process. For warehouses, as an example, it's going to be your labels, it's going to be your carton boxes, any material you use to create the final product. Energy, maybe not so important for our examples, but maybe if you're a shipping company, the price of fuel is an energy cost. It can be quite volatile, so you want to make sure you're monitoring that if it's pertinent to your business. Also, capital. Did you invest in a building? Did you invest in materials, equipment to be using, making your processes easier? So the cost of capital, you have to make a large investment, maybe get a bank loan. You have to depreciate that asset over time. What are the costs associated with having that asset? So all 4 of those go into your total productivity measure. Now if you want to split those out individually, keeping one or two or more together, it's going to depend on your business. So 2 or more factors together of those 4 we talked about: labor, material, energy, and capital. A lot of the types of businesses, service or manufacturing, maybe don't have so much of an emphasis on energy and capital. So I have a lot of interest in labor and material. It's going to be the best use of your employees, the best use of the inputs that's coming in. So you may want to have a combined focus on that. Just focus on your labor and material. Take out the volatility of the energy and the capital. If you don't have a capital-intensive business, maybe you don't want to focus on that. So take into account the needs of your business and then focus on those factors that are best for you. Now, when we get into partial productivity, we're just taking one of those 4 in isolation. So it really gives you a good idea of how that part of the business is functioning, but it may lead you to make incorrect decisions. So it can increase one area of productivity at the cost of another. So take, for example, labor versus equipment. So you might have an inefficient process for your labor, but they've been doing it, and you want to bring a machine in to try and improve that process. But the cost of the machine is very high. It's a very expensive machine. But that would mean that if you bring that machine in and replace that labor, the cheap cost of labor is going to be replaced with an expensive machine. So it may not pan out in the long term to bring that machine in. Overall, your total productivity will decrease because the machine cost is too expensive. If that makes sense. All right, so moving on, in our lesson, we just want to cover briefly our productivity. So we want to watch total productivity. The total is going to be your major focus, but to get into the details of the health of each area, you want to break it into partial and multi-factor based on the needs of your business. And be sure to measure consistently. I like to do this with the billing cycle. So every month, my warehouse would send out invoices at the beginning of the month. The second week, then we'll put everything into our productivity. And by the third week, we're having a management meeting to cover our results of the previous month and what we can do the current month to make things better. Okay? Now, don't miss the next lesson. We've covered some productivity. We're not going to go in detail because we're actually going to be covering value stream mapping as our focus. So if you have any questions, jump into the group, My House to Warehouse Training Academy. The link is down in the comments. We'll get those high-level questions for productivity covered. But it's important to kind of have that understanding as we dive into value stream mapping. Okay, so a quick review of value stream mapping. We're covering the tools laid out in mapping the total value stream. So these authors have a good deal of experience bringing change into business using the value stream. So we're kind of using their examples. They say to see value, to differentiate value from waste, and to create a plan of action for waste elimination. So we're kind of using that as our focus as we go through. Now, value stream productivity, you're going to focus on 2 areas here. It's going to be takt time and days inventory. So takt time is a German word. It means pulse. It's going to be kind of a focus on the labor of your business. How much labor is going in to creating each unit? How much time does it take? What is the pulse of the business, unit by unit, that needs to be completed to fill your customer demand? Now, days inventory, we talked about the value stream map previously, where we need to focus on the inventory in each section. So we'll get to that in a minute. So takt time, total time available. So you don't want to account for any breaks, meetings in the beginning of the day, any lunch times. It's just going to be the time that workers should be on task. So take out the breaks, take out the general meetings, only focus on when they should be working. Customer demand is going to be the output that's required. You can take a look at your monthly value and break it down into a daily rate. We'll do an example of that here in a second to see a little bit more in detail. And you want to measure your current operations, actually what's happening on the ground. So don't go with the ideal. Make sure you're checking the actual pulse on the ground. So an example of takt, how we're going to calculate that is take a look at your schedule. Your labor schedule can be 8 to 5, 8 to 5:30. In this example, there's 9.5 hours where the people are actually present for work, but there's breaks. So there's two 15-minute breaks and then 1 hour lunch. With a 5-day work week, that means they're available for working on their tasks 8 hours each day. For the order rate, we're looking at about 10,000 orders per month they're going to be working on. And we know that each order is going to have 3 units. And then that breaks down into a daily rate of 500 orders per day for a total of 1,500 units required every day. So if you want to break that down into a daily rate, we have an 8-hour day requiring 1,500 units. You do the calculation, it's going to come out to you're needing to push out 1 unit every 19.2 seconds. That's going to be our pulse. 1 unit every 19.2 seconds. So hang on to that. We're going to use that later. Now let's jump into our day's inventory calculation. We're going to be looking at the inventory at each process of the value stream map. So that was a main thing we talked about last time. When you map your value stream, you want to take a look at the inventory at every process. And we're going to be using that tact time, the units per day, so that 1,500 units every day, to help us calculate how much inventory in days is available at each station. So we're going to take a look at that. Let's quickly use our value streams. So we'll dive in really quick, a quick review of value stream mapping, lightning round, and then we'll get started with a live example. So value stream mapping is kind of a process of what you use to implement either productivity improvement, quality improvement, anything you want to do. It's going to help you focus in on where you can make those improvements. There's 3 levels. There's a company level to get your high level customer and processes laid out. Dumping down to 1 level below that is a function level. And what we're going to be doing today is the process level. And this is really good as it's going to eliminate internalization and resistance to change that you might have from employees in the workspace. It's also a great sales training tool. You're going to see if that is new customers come in, they're going to see your company working on this. New employees are going to have an easier time learning if this process are laid out already with value stream map. It's important to use a team to make these changes, to gather these information, and then start at the end of the work process and work towards the beginning. So we'll do an example of that here. Alright, so we have our items from last time that we talked about on our note cards. And we want to go from delivery to ASN in the system, item setup, and then after item setup, there's counting, assigning to an LPN. LPN is just kind of an address for that cart. We're going to do any value-added services that are required, like bagging, labeling, and then finally put away. So this is all the tasks that are available that I saw as I observed inbound. But there's some that aren't actually value added. The moving the pallet and then the finding the PO and ASN system are actually the setup time for doing the count. We also have some secondary services that don't happen every time. So our primary is there. You can think about it as the receiving process, put away process, and then these there at the bottom are the secondary tasks. So we're going to go ahead and map this into a digital version. So the idea of that was to use each note card as you observe the process. After you sort out the process using the note cards, then transition into a digital hard copy. It's a bit easier to use the note cards, move things around, focus in on what's the actual process, the value-added process, rather than steps, because we're focusing on adding value. So in that example, the tasks of moving the pallet, finding the information in the system weren't actually value-added. That was part of the setup time to actually do the count and LPN assignment. Okay, so let's take another look. Okay, so later we'll see the value stream map. Just a quick review. We want to have one function area for the process name, and then we're going to be covering certain things along the way, like cycle time, changeover, uptime, whatever is pertinent to your business. Cycle time and inventory is the most important. Now this is an example from our reference material, mapping the total value stream of what the official value stream map should look like. So we're going to aim for something like this as we use our live example from just now. So we have our main flow from our note cards. We had delivery. We're going to do that receiving process, which is primarily the count in the LPN assignment. Now we look at that cycle time. It's 1.2 seconds to actually count each unit as you go through on average. So if I was observing this, I would check how many units they were able to receive, how long it took, and then calculate that into a per unit rate. Continuing on, we observed that there was an item setup process that occurred occasionally. When I saw that, that was about a 48-second process for every unit that they had to set up, do the measurement, set up in the system, make sure it's ready for receiving. After that setup was complete, then they can go return back to the normal receiving process of counting and assigning that license plate. There was a secondary process of any value-added services in receiving, like putting in a protective bag, doing shrink wrap, things like this. After that, you have to label with a barcode so the process later can use their scanners. So that was a secondary process, and from there, I could tell as observing there was a 19-second cycle time for bagging and a 2-second cycle time per unit for the labeling. So we take a look at each process, the cycle time for it. We're going to sum up the inventory that's all in this receiving process, and I observed 484 units. All right. Upstream in the put away, there was 10,000 units waiting, and then after delivery, waiting for the receiving process, there was 20,000 units waiting. So we're going to use this information to continue our investigation using our tact time and our days inventory that our tact time in a daily rate and our tact time in the 19.2 seconds for every unit required to ship out. That's our pulse. So let's go to take a look at the days inventory first. We're going to calculate that. It's the 1,500 units per day that we need to ship out. And we want to take a look at the inventory at every section. We have the delivery section, the receiving, the count and LPN section, and the put away section. So in these sections, if you divide each quantity of inventory by that 1,500, that'll give the time in days it would take for them to process that inventory at that tact rate. So you can see the change there. It becomes 13.3 days to process that delivery at that 1,500 daily rate. Our receiving process is quite fast, a third of a day to complete all 480 units inside that receiving process. And put away, we've got 6.6 days worth of inventory stuck in that process as well. If we use our 19.2, that's going to be an area we want to focus on the delivery. It's actually a quite high number. You want to make sure that your inventory is a bit closer to 1 day because that's going to be a lot of inventory waiting for process. In this case, we're looking at delivery. So the delivery of goods are waiting there to be received. So the customer is waiting for us to bring them into stock to sell. So we want to try and reduce the amount of inventory waiting for that receiving process. So that's an area that we want to focus on going forward. Now taking a look at our cycle time. Our cycle time is 19.2 seconds. And then if you take a look at our our tact time is 19.2 seconds. But our cycle time for item setup is actually 48 seconds. So it takes more than twice as long to finish an item setup as our rate to ship units out of the warehouse. So that's an indication that there could be a potential issue here. If we have a lot of new items coming in that require a setup, it's going to get us behind. Right? We're not going to be able to complete our item setup in a fast enough rate to reach our tact rate of the 19.2 seconds. So take a look, compare your tact rate to the cycle times in all your processes. Another potential issue is in the bagging. So if there's a lot of units coming in that require a value-added service, then that may get us behind schedule of our tact rate. So take a look at that, those two sections, The days inventory using your daily rate of all your inventory. How many days do you have on hand? The largest rate is going to be kind of where you want to focus on, how to reduce that. And then your per unit rate compared against your cycle times to see where those hotspots may be if you run into problems later. All right, so now is the chance for you to go measure your own productivity. We've covered in the last lesson how to make that value stream map. So if you have any questions on that, go and jump down into the description, cover that lesson, and get that value stream started if you haven't already. If you have your value stream, make sure that you have all your information, your productivity, your cycle times, the units of inventory, and do all those calculations. Find out where your hotspots are. In the next lesson, we're going to cover out how to make corrections to those hotspots. What's the best way to do it without affecting your total productivity. All right. So take a look for the next lesson. It's going to be same time next week in the My House to Warehouse training group. Again, it's 10 a.m. Singapore. West Coast will be 7 p.m. now with daylight savings time, and East Coast will be 10 p.m. with daylight savings time. So guys, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate you hanging out for this lesson. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.